All the hunters were armed, except the human who brought a grocery list. The shuttlecraft touched down on Karvesh Prime with a gentle thud that made Jake Morrison grip his seat. He had been traveling for 3 days across 2 solar systems, and his stomach reminded him with an angry growl that he had run out of snacks yesterday. The only thing keeping him going was the promise of a famous intergalactic marketplace that supposedly sold food from 100 different worlds. Jake grabbed his reusable shopping bag and checked his handwritten list one more time. Milk, bread, eggs, coffee, and maybe something interesting if he found it. His apartment back on the human colony station was completely empty, and he needed supplies before his night shift at the communications hub started tomorrow. The spaceport was crowded with beings of every shape and size imaginable. Jake walked past a group of tall blue aliens with 4 arms, then squeezed around a floating jellyfish creature that hummed as it drifted by. Everyone seemed to be heading in the same direction, toward a massive building with bright lights and loud announcements echoing from speakers. Perfect. That had to be the marketplace. Jake followed the crowd through the main entrance and found himself in a huge registration hall. Hundreds of aliens stood in lines before tall desks where officials checked documents and handed out equipment. Strange weapons and hunting gear hung on the walls. Jake felt confused but kept walking, looking for signs that might point to where they sold actual food. A small robot on wheels rolled up to him, beeping cheerfully. A mechanical arm extended a data pad toward Jake's face. "Name and home world for registration," the robot said in perfect English. "Oh, I'm just looking for the marketplace," Jake said, trying to step around it. "You know, where they sell groceries." "Name and home world, please." "Registered. Proceed to Equipment Station 7 for weapon selection and briefing." It had his name, a number, and a lot of alien symbols he could not read. Around him, other beings were strapping on armor and testing plasma rifles that hummed with dangerous energy. This was definitely not a marketplace. Before Jake could leave, a booming voice echoed through the hall. Every being stopped and turned toward a raised platform where a massive creature stood. It had gray, scaly skin, 6 legs, and a head that reminded Jake of a hammerhead shark. The creature wore elaborate robes covered in metals. "Welcome, warriors, to the 412th Galactic Hunting Championships," the Hunt Master announced. The crowd erupted in cheers and roars. "You have traveled from across known space to prove your worth in the greatest test of skill and bravery. This year's challenge is legendary," the Hunt Master continued. "You will track and capture the shadow stalker of Karvesh Prime, a creature that has eluded hunters for 3 centuries, a predator that can vanish from sight and strike without warning. Many have tried. All have failed. Use any method you choose. The first hunter to capture the shadow stalker wins the grand prize and eternal glory. But remember, anyone who registers must participate. To withdraw is to admit cowardice, and cowards face imprisonment under galactic hunting law." "Excuse me, there's been a mistake. I'm not supposed to." At the equipment stations, Jake watched as other hunters selected their gear. A massive reptilian creature named Vrachthies grabbed 3 plasma rifles and strapped them across his broad chest. His scales were dark green, and his teeth looked sharp enough to cut metal. He noticed Jake watching and laughed. "You look lost, little human," Vrachthies said. "Where is your armor, your weapons?" "You hear that?" He turned to a nearby insectoid warrior. The human brought his shopping list to a death hunt. Its body was covered in sharp purple chitin, and biological weapons grew from its forearms like organic cannons. "Humans are weak," Zorath said in a buzzing voice. "No natural weapons, no armor. This one will not survive the first night." She looked Jake up and down with obvious disappointment. "Every year someone unprepared joins by accident," Nick said. "Usually they quit before the hunt begins. You should do the same, human. The shadow stalker shows no mercy to the foolish." He wanted to find whoever was in charge and explain the whole stupid mistake, but when he finally reached an official who would listen, the answer was clear and cold. "Registration is final," the official said, not even looking up from his computer. "Galactic hunting law. You participate or you face imprisonment for cowardice. Those are your only options." And somewhere on this planet was a deadly invisible predator that he was now supposed to hunt without any weapons, training, or even a basic understanding of what he was doing. The other hunters boarded their vessels, heavily armed and confident. They laughed and made bets about who would win. Nobody bet on the human with the grocery bag. Jake climbed into the basic transport pod assigned to him. Through the window, he could see the dark forests of Karvesh Prime stretching to the horizon. Somewhere in those shadows waited the Shadow Stalker. He pulled out his grocery list and stared at it. Milk, bread, eggs, coffee. Well, Jake said to himself, this is definitely not how I plan to spend my day off. The moment he stepped out, he heard the roar of engines as the other hunters raced deeper into the forest. Plasma fire lit up the distance, followed by explosions that sent flocks of strange, bird-like creatures screaming into the air. Jake stood alone in the clearing, holding his shopping bag and feeling completely out of place. He could hear Vrakthi's shouting orders through a loudspeaker somewhere to the north. Zorath's bioweapons made a distinct whistling sound as they fired at something Jake could not see. Commander Nix's scanners beeped and chirped as she flew overhead in her advanced hunting craft. They were all so prepared, so equipped, so confident. And here was Jake with a grocery list and 3 granola bars. He sat down on a fallen log and pulled out one of the granola bars. It was chocolate chip, his favorite. As he chewed slowly, he watched the forest around him. The other hunters were making so much noise that every creature within miles probably knew exactly where they were. Trees exploded as plasma bolts missed their targets. The ground shook from heavy footsteps as Vrakthi's charged through the undergrowth like a tank. Jake figured if everyone else was going loud, maybe he should try going quiet. He did not have weapons anyway, so stealth seemed like his only option. Plus, he was getting hungry, and there was no point rushing to get eaten by an invisible monster on an empty stomach. He started walking slowly through the forest, paying attention to where he stepped. The purple trees had leaves that shimmered like metal, and the ground was covered in soft moss that glowed faintly in the shadows. Strange insects buzzed past his head, and something that looked like a squirrel with 6 legs watched him from a branch before scurrying away. In the distance, Jake heard Vrakthi's roar in frustration. "Where is this creature? Show yourself, coward." He noticed that animals seemed to avoid certain areas completely. There were paths where no creatures walked, and sections of forest where even the insects stayed away. Jake pulled out his grocery list and used the back of it to sketch a rough map. He marked where he heard the hunters and noted the areas where wildlife seemed scared. His grandfather had taught him basic tracking during camping trips as a kid. The old man always said that nature tells you stories if you pay attention. After an hour of walking, Jake found something interesting. A section of ground showed unusual marks, like something heavy had been dragged. The moss was disturbed in a pattern that did not match any of the local animals he had seen. He knelt down and touched the marks carefully. Fresh, whatever made these tracks had been here recently. A sharp sound made Jake freeze. Something was crying in pain nearby. He moved slowly toward the noise and found a small creature trapped in a metal snare. It looked like a cross between a rabbit and a lizard, with soft fur and small scales. The trap had cut into its leg, and the creature made pitiful whimpering sounds as it struggled. Jake recognized the trap design. It was old, probably left by hunters from previous championships. The organizers clearly did not clean up after these events very well. "Hey there, little guy," Jake said softly, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "Let me help you." He opened his shopping bag and pulled out the antiseptic wipes he always carried. His mother had taught him to keep a basic first aid kit handy, and old habits were hard to break even in space. Working carefully, Jake managed to open the trap. The creature yelped as it came free, but Jake was ready with the wipes to clean the wound. He tore strips from an old cloth napkin in his bag and wrapped the creature's leg as best he could. "There you go," Jake said. "You should probably stay hidden for a few days. There are a lot of dangerous idiots running around with guns." Around him, the forest seemed a little less threatening. He continued walking, and without really thinking about it, he started leaving small pieces of his granola bar at various points along the path. His mother would have scolded him for littering, but something told him it might be useful. The sun was setting, turning the sky deep orange and purple. Jake found a relatively safe spot between 2 large rocks and sat down to rest. In the distance, he could still hear the other hunters. They sounded tired and frustrated. According to their angry shouts over the communication channels, none of them had spotted the Shadow Stalker even once. Jake pulled out his second granola bar and was about to take a bite when he heard a soft chirping sound. The small creature he had helped earlier poked its head out from behind a tree. It was not alone. 3 more of the same species emerged, watching Jake with curious eyes. "Hey again," Jake said quietly. "Brought your family." When they finished, the one Jake had helped earlier chirped again and moved toward a specific direction in the forest. It looked back at Jake, chirped once more, then started walking. Jake had a strange feeling the creature wanted him to follow. He had nothing better to do and no real plan anyway, so he gathered his shopping bag and followed the small group. They moved through the forest along paths Jake would never have found on his own, avoiding areas that felt wrong and steering clear of places where the other hunters had caused damage. After 20 minutes of walking, the creatures stopped at the edge of a clearing. They chirped urgently at Jake, then quickly disappeared into the undergrowth as if this was as far as they dared to go. Jake looked at the clearing ahead. The trees here were older, bigger, and the air felt different, heavier somehow. The moss glowed brighter, and strange flowers that only bloomed at night opened their petals, releasing a soft blue light. This was territory, important territory. Jake could feel it even without any special equipment or scanners. He took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing, his grocery bag still hanging from his shoulder. Somewhere far behind him, Vrakthais fired another round of plasma bolts at nothing. Commander Nix's scanners beeped uselessly, finding only trees and rocks. But Jake was here in this clearing, unarmed and unprepared, standing in what he was now certain was the Shadow Stalker's home. The air shimmered slightly in front of him, like heat waves on a summer day. Jake stood very still and pulled out his last granola bar. He unwrapped it slowly, the crinkling paper loud in the quiet clearing. "I don't suppose you're hungry," Jake said to the empty air. "Because I have to tell you I came here looking for a grocery store and this has been a really weird day." Jake's heart pounded, but he stayed still. Something was watching him, studying him, deciding whether he was a threat. Jake did the only thing he could think of. He broke the granola bar in half, took a bite of one piece, and placed the other piece on the ground in front of him. Then he sat down cross-legged and waited to see what would happen next. The shimmer in the air moved in a slow circle around Jake, studying him from different angles. He could feel the weight of an intelligent gaze, something far more aware than a simple animal. His hands trembled slightly, but he kept them relaxed on his knees, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. Minutes passed in silence. The only sounds were the distant crashes of the other hunters destroying the forest and the soft rustle of wind through the glowing flowers. Jake's legs started to go numb from sitting, but he did not move. The granola bar piece still sat untouched on the ground in front of him. Then slowly the shimmer began to solidify. It happened gradually, like watching fog become water. First Jake could see an outline, then colors started to appear. Deep purple mixed with silver, patterns that swirled and shifted across what he now realized was skin or maybe scales. The creature was large, about the size of a horse, but built low to the ground like a big cat. It had 6 legs, each ending in paws that made no sound on the moss. Its head was elegant and angular, with large eyes that held an intelligence that made Jake catch his breath. The Shadow Stalker was beautiful. It stared at Jake for a long moment, then looked down at the granola bar. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the offering. The creature's colors shifted from purple and silver to include hints of deep blue, the patterns moving across its body like waves. Jake had no idea if the color change meant anger or curiosity, but he decided to treat it like a conversation. He pulled out his notebook, the one where he had drawn his rough map, and quickly sketched the creature's current color pattern. The Shadow Stalker's eyes followed his hand movements. Its colors shifted again, this time to mostly silver with streaks of green. Jake sketched that pattern too, then held up the notebook so the creature could see. "I'm trying to understand," he said quietly. "Are you talking to me with colors?" After another moment of consideration, it leaned forward and carefully took the food in its mouth. It chewed slowly, thoughtfully, never taking its eyes off Jake. When it swallowed, the colors on its body shifted to warm gold and orange. Jake took a guess that gold and orange might mean something positive. He sketched those colors in his notebook and drew a simple smiley face next to them. The Shadow Stalker watched this with what seemed like fascination. Encouraged, Jake slowly reached into his shopping bag. The creature tensed, colors flashing to dark red and black. Jake immediately froze and put his hands back on his knees. After a moment, the red and black faded back to the calmer purple and silver. "Okay," Jake said. "Red and black means stop." "Got it." He pulled out the sandwich he had packed for the journey, holding it up so the creature could see clearly what he was doing. The colors stayed calm. He unwrapped the sandwich and broke off a piece of lettuce and tomato, placing it on the ground. The shadow stalker sniffed it, seemed unimpressed but appreciated the gesture. Its colors shifted to a soft pink and white combination. Jake drew that in his notebook too. Pink and white means thank you but no thanks. Purple with gold streaks seemed to indicate contentment. And the creature showed flashes of orange and yellow when something amused it, which happened when Jake tried to explain what a grocery list was. "See, I just needed milk and eggs," Jake said, showing the creature his crumpled list. "But instead I'm here talking to a legendary predator using a notebook and food. My roommate is never going to believe this." The creature's colors were calm now, mostly purple and silver with hints of that warm gold. Then the shadow stalker did something unexpected. It stood up and walked to the edge of the clearing, looking back at Jake with clear expectation. The colors on its body pulsed gently like a beckoning signal. Jake stood up carefully, his legs tingling as blood flow returned. "You want me to follow you?" Jake grabbed his shopping bag and notebook, then followed the shadow stalker deeper into the forest. They moved through areas Jake would never have dared to explore alone. The creature led him past hidden ravines and through passages between rocks that seemed barely wide enough to fit through. After 15 minutes of walking, they reached a cave hidden behind a waterfall. The shadow stalker paused at the entrance, its colors shifting to soft pink and protective orange. It made a low sound, almost like a mother calling to children. From inside the cave came answering chirps. Small versions of the shadow stalker emerged, 3 of them, each no bigger than a house cat. They were not fully developed yet and could not turn invisible. Their colors were brighter and less controlled than their parent, shifting rapidly with emotion and excitement. One of the babies bounded toward Jake with the fearless curiosity of the very young. It sniffed his shoes and his shopping bag, making happy chirping sounds. The other 2 were more cautious, staying close to their parent. Jake understood now. The shadow stalker was not a mindless predator. It was a parent protecting a family. The reason it had avoided all the other hunters for 3 centuries was because it was smart enough to know they meant harm. The adult shadow stalker's colors showed deep blue and silver as it watched Jake interact with its babies. The brave one had climbed halfway up Jake's leg and was trying to eat his shoelace. "Hey, that's not food," Jake said gently, scooping up the baby. It was warm and surprisingly heavy, and it purred in his arms like a cat. The colors on its small body shifted to happy gold and orange. The parent creature moved closer, and Jake carefully set the baby down. He pulled out his notebook and started sketching quickly. He drew the cave, the babies, and the parent. Then he drew stick figures of the other hunters with their weapons, and he drew big X marks through them. The shadow stalker watched intently as Jake drew himself standing between the hunters and the cave. He pointed to the drawing, then to himself, then to the creature and its babies. "I want to help," Jake said. "I don't want them to hurt you or your family." Then it did something that made Jake's heart skip. It moved forward and gently pressed its head against Jake's chest, a gesture of trust that transcended species. Jake slowly raised his hand and touched the creature's head. The skin was smooth and warm, and he could feel a gentle vibration like a purr running through it. The colors under his hand shifted to soft gold and pink. In the distance, Jake heard a new sound: engines. The other hunters were regrouping and organizing a systematic search. Vrakthise's voice boomed through speakers, announcing they would cover every section of the forest before dawn. The shadow stalker heard it too. Its colors flashed to warning red and protective black. The babies hurried back into the cave, sensing their parents' alarm. Jake looked at his notebook, then at the creature, then back toward where the hunters were approaching. He pulled out his grocery list one more time and stared at it. Sometimes you need to know what you are really looking for before you can find it. He was not looking for a trophy or glory. He was looking for a way to protect this family and maybe, just maybe, teach the other hunters that there was more than one way to succeed. "Okay," Jake said to the shadow stalker. "I have an idea. But you're going to have to trust me." The sound of engines grew louder as Jake finished explaining his plan to the Shadow Stalker. He used simple drawings and gestures, pointing at himself, then at the creature, then toward where the hunters were gathering. The Shadow Stalker's colors shifted through several patterns before settling on cautious yellow and green, which Jake had learned meant uncertain agreement. "I know it's risky," Jake said, tucking his notebook back into his shopping bag. "But if we don't do something, they'll eventually find this cave, and I don't think they'll be as friendly as me." The little ones responded with worried sounds, but retreated deeper into the cave as their parent instructed. Jake and the Shadow Stalker moved through the forest together, heading toward the convergence point where the hunters had gathered. The creature stayed mostly invisible, just a shimmer in the air beside Jake, but occasionally it would flash into visibility for a moment to check on him. They reached the edge of a large clearing where Vrachthi's had set up a command position. The massive reptilian hunter stood on top of his armored vehicle, surrounded by scanning equipment and weapons. Commander Nix circled overhead in her craft, and Zorath stood nearby, his biological weapons primed and ready. At least 20 other hunters had joined them, all frustrated and angry after 2 days of finding nothing. Their vehicles had torn up huge sections of forest, and small fires burned where plasma weapons had scorched the ground. Jake took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing, his hands raised and empty except for his shopping bag. "Hey," he shouted, "I found it." "The human," Vrachthi's growled. "We thought you were dead. Where have you been hiding?" "And I found the Shadow Stalker." He reached the center of the clearing and stopped, very aware that dozens of weapons were still pointed at him. "You've all been hunting like it's a monster, but it's not. You try to claim victory with tricks." Its colors were dark and warning, mostly black with streaks of protective red, but it stayed close to Jake and did not attack. Vrachthi's roared and aimed his plasma rifle. "Stand aside, human. You may have found it, but the capture is mine. Really look. More intelligent than most species in the galaxy, probably. It's been avoiding you for 300 years not because it's a coward, but because it's smart enough to know that hunters mean death. Explain yourself, human. How did you capture it without weapons?" "You are more foolish than we thought. Watch." Jake then showed a drawing of hunters with weapons, and the colors changed to warning red and black. "See," Jake said, "it understands, and it's not alone." Several hunters lowered their weapons completely, shock crossing their faces. "It has offspring," Commander Nix said quietly. "That's why it stayed in one territory for so long. It's protecting its young. Every time hunters come to this planet, they tear up the forest looking for a trophy. But the Shadow Stalker isn't a trophy. It's a parent doing what any of you would do, protecting its family. But the rules are clear. We must capture the Shadow Stalker. That is the competition. Or by force. Show them you're choosing to be here with me." It walked in a slow circle around Jake, its colors shifting to warm and peaceful tones. It stopped beside him and gently pressed its head against his shoulder just as it had done in the cave. The gesture was unmistakable. Trust, choice, partnership. "By the ancient stars," Commander Nix whispered, "it's choosing him. This human has earned its trust in 2 days. Maybe we've been doing it wrong for 300 years. His hammer-shaped head swiveled to take in the scene, his eyes focusing on Jake standing peacefully beside the legendary creature. "What is the meaning of this?" the Huntmaster demanded. "Why have weapons not been fired?" The human claims to have captured the Shadow Stalker through conversation and trust. He says it chooses to stay with him. The creature's colors remained calm, though protective patterns appeared whenever the Huntmaster got too close to Jake. "Remarkable," the Huntmaster said finally. "In 412 championships, I have never seen anything like this. It trusts me. By any reasonable definition, that's a successful capture." Others looked thoughtful, their expressions changing as they reconsidered everything they thought they knew about hunting. Finally, the Huntmaster spoke. "I must consult the ancient competition records. This situation is unprecedented." Jake reached into his shopping bag and pulled out his last remaining snack, a package of crackers. He offered one to the Shadow Stalker, who took it gently and ate it while every hunter in the clearing watched in stunned silence. In the distance, the sun was beginning to rise on the third and final day of the competition. Whatever the Hunt Master decided would determine not just the outcome of the championship, but possibly the future of how intelligent beings across the galaxy thought about hunting, respect, and the difference between conquest and understanding. Jake scratched the shadow stalker gently behind what might have been an ear. The creature purred, its colors shifting to contented gold. Whatever happened next, at least he had made one very unusual friend. The Hunt Master scrolled through his data device for what felt like hours. Jake stood quietly beside the shadow stalker, trying not to show how nervous he was. His legs ached from standing so long, and his stomach reminded him that crackers were not a proper breakfast. But he stayed still and calm, knowing that any sudden movement might change the delicate balance of the moment. Finally, the Hunt Master looked up from his device. His hammer-shaped head tilted as he studied Jake with an expression that might have been respect. "I have reviewed the complete history of the Galactic Hunting Championships," the Hunt Master announced. "The rules state that a hunter must capture the target creature. The definition of capture has traditionally meant physical restraint or imprisonment. However, the oldest records, from the very first championship over 4,000 years ago, define capture differently. The original rule states that a hunter must demonstrate complete mastery over the target creature," the Hunt Master continued. "Mastery was measured by the creature's willingness to remain with the hunter without need for restraint. The founders believed that true hunting skill meant understanding the prey so well that force became unnecessary. We have always used weapons and force. It was simply forgotten." The Shadow Stalker's colors shifted to surprised purple and silver. "Jake Morrison of Earth," the Hunt Master said formally, "you have done what no hunter has accomplished in recorded history. You have earned the trust and cooperation of a creature that has eluded capture for 3 centuries. By the oldest and truest definition of our laws, you have successfully completed the hunt." Some hunters cheered, impressed by the unprecedented achievement. Others shouted in protest, angry that their weapons and technology had been made useless by simple kindness. Vrakthi's roared his disapproval while Zorath clicked in what might have been grudging admiration. Jake felt dizzy with relief. The Shadow Stalker pressed closer to him, its colors flashing protective patterns as it sensed the mixed reactions from the crowd. The Hunt Master raised his arms for silence. "However, there is the matter of the prize. Traditionally, the winner receives a trophy made from the captured creature. Obviously, that will not be appropriate in this case." "I don't want anything like that. You must claim some reward." He thought about the Shadow Stalker's babies hiding in the cave, and all the other creatures on Karvesh Prime that had to hide every time a championship was held. "I want Karvesh Prime to become a protected conservation zone," Jake said. "No more hunting championships here. No more tearing up the forest with weapons and vehicles. Let the Shadow Stalker and all the other creatures live in peace. This planet has hosted the championship for over 400 years. What everyone has been doing here isn't hunting, it's just destruction. Perhaps it is time we learned something new. I spent 2 days firing weapons at shadows and learned nothing. The humans spent 2 days watching and learning and made a friend. I do not like admitting this, but he has shown us a better way. By my authority as master of the Galactic Hunting Championships, I declare Karvesh Prime a protected conservation zone effective immediately. All future championships will be held on designated planets, where such activities do not harm native species or ecosystems." The Shadow Stalker's colors shifted to bright gold and happy orange, as if it understood that its home was now safe. "Additionally," the Hunt Master continued, "I have one more request for you, Jake Morrison. We need proper signage directing visitors to the actual marketplace. Many beings have complained about accidentally registering for the championship when they only wanted to buy groceries. Better signs would be great. I've been trying to buy milk and eggs for 3 days now." Commander Nix asked if she could study his notebook of color patterns, fascinated by the communication method he had discovered. Zorath wanted to know more about human tracking techniques that did not require destroying the environment. Even Vrakthi's grudgingly approached. "You are braver than you look, human. To stand unarmed before the Shadow Stalker took courage I did not think your species possessed. Wisdom, perhaps that is another thing we must learn." The brave one that had tried to eat his shoelace before now attempted to climb into his shopping bag. Your family is safe now, Jake told the shadow stalker, gently removing the baby from his bag. No more hunters, no more weapons. Just peace. It touched its head to Jake's chest one more time, a gesture he would remember for the rest of his life. Later that afternoon, Jake finally made it to the actual marketplace. It was exactly where the new signs directed him, impossible to miss now. He bought milk, bread, eggs, coffee, and several packages of the granola bars that the shadow stalker had seemed to enjoy. As he loaded his groceries into his transport pod, he noticed something in his shopping bag. The shadow stalker had somehow placed one of its shed scales inside, a beautiful purple and silver piece about the size of his palm. It shimmered with the same color-changing properties as the creature's skin. Jake smiled and carefully tucked it into his notebook for safekeeping. When he got back to his apartment, he would write down everything that happened. Not for fame or recognition, but so he would never forget the 3 days he spent lost in a forest with a grocery list, learning that sometimes the best way to succeed was not through force, but through patience, kindness, and a willingness to understand. His communication device beeped with a message from the hunt master. The Galactic Hunting Museum wanted to display his grocery list as a historical artifact, a symbol of how small things could lead to big changes. Jake laughed and sent back his agreement. His grocery list, the most important piece of paper in the galaxy. He started the engines and headed home, already planning his next shopping trip. Next time, he would double-check the signs before walking into any buildings. But somehow, he suspected his days of accidental adventures were far from over. In the forest below, the shadow stalker and its family settled peacefully in their cave, their home finally safe. And across the galaxy, hunters began to talk about a new way of thinking, a better way of succeeding, all because one human brought a grocery list instead of a gun. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4.5.